Okay. One of the things that you consider when you're dealing with a committee and when you're dealing with governance in general, when you're dealing with what you are going to do with your life, are you focused on mastering nature or are you focused on mastering man? This is a very blunt and basic way of looking at it, but it helps us to understand what we are really doing. In a teaching job, my job is not to master nature so much. I am not cutting down forests. I am not building dams. I am not constructing bridges or skyscrapers. I am not curing diseases. What I am doing is I am trying my poor best to make what I am teaching you interesting because it's important. If you don't understand how government works, you will be a victim of it. Everyone, especially in a free society, needs to understand how government works. That's my job with you as a civics teacher. Because government, if you don't keep it in check, will act like it's the boss of you. Because it's got armed men in its employ whose only job is to do what the government says must be done. And if you ignore what the government says, you will be a criminal or worse. In a free society, though, the government works for us. That's the theory. The government is the servant of the people. The elected officials are the servants of the people. But if we don't remind them that we're paying attention, and if we don't understand what they're doing, they will quickly forget that. And instead, they will think that they are the people's master, which is not a good thing for any politician to think. In a sense, my job is to master man, as in human beings, in that I am trying to inspire a curiosity in you, an interest in you, and this stuff and why it matters. But I am also, in one sense, trying to master nature. If you view nature as the historical record of politics, and if you view nature as the political system that exists now, what I'm trying to do is find ways of explaining something that's as complicated as a complicated can be and get to the simple heart of it. We human beings make complications because it allows us to wield power. If we had a tax system, for example, that was simply a percentage of income, if the federal income tax, which is borderline constitutional to begin with, if the federal income tax was a flat rate of, say, 10% of your income, of your gross income, then we wouldn't need an Internal Revenue Service the way we have now. We wouldn't need H&R Block or TurboTax or anything else. It would be a simple system. If you make a little money, you pay 10% of that little money in taxes. If you make a lot of money, you pay 10% of that lot of money taxes. But instead, all in the name of compassion, we have complicated the tax code to the point where only tax professionals can understand what the heck's going on. And that's supposed to give people at the bottom of the scale fewer tax burdens and people at the top of the scale more tax burdens. And that's, in fact, what happens. The bottom 50% of wage earners pay an insignificant amount to federal income tax. The top 1% pays between 30 and 40% of our federal income tax. That's a lot for a few people because they make so much money. My point here is not about taxes, it's about complication. The more you complicate something, the more experts are needed. The more experts are needed, the more they have power. Experts, that is. The same is true for our governance. The congressional system is supposed to be simple. Every section of the country elects a representative, takes part, every state in the country elects 2 senators. And those representatives and those senators speak for the interests of the people in those states and in those districts. That's the simple thing. Who do they represent when they make decisions? Do they represent themselves and their best judgment? Elect me, I am wise. Or do they represent the interests of the people? Elect me, I'll always ask you what you want me to do. Truth is, it's a little of both. But the reality is, it's not that simple. The traditions of Congress that keep freshman congressmen at the bottom of the heap, that keep people who've just mastered their districts and won elections and think of themselves as super alpha, suddenly get their egos snapped and crushed so that they will be good followers, good betas, because that's what's needed. You need a lot of congressmen and a lot of senators to do what the leadership wants. Politics is by its very nature not about mastering nature. It's about mastering men. Human beings are both independent creatures and we are social. To the extent we're independent creatures, we want to do our own thing. That's the basis for the appeal of freedom. But to the extent we are social creatures, we are going to play our role in the group dynamic. And not all of us are alphas all the time. In fact, many of us are situational alphas. Some of you may be really quiet in class, but if you play a sport, you're a monster, a tiger on the ball field. Some of you are very quiet at home, but you're very, very loud and opinionated, and you're sort of a natural leader at school, or vice versa. Mastering nature is fairly pure. Your job is to figure out how to make the world a better place, how to grow more food per acre on your farm, how to transport things more effectively by building new and better roads or repairing the old ones so that they're better than they used to be, how to get people through a crowded, complicated intersection without everyone dying. That's traffic controls. Is that controlling nature or is that controlling man? It's a little both, isn't it? Controlling nature is something that demands an ability to see things as they are objectively. Whether we like it or not, this is the way the world is. And if we don't deal with the world the way it is, we don't deal with the world. And whatever solutions we bring are going to fail. It's like building a house on sand. It's not on a strong foundation of bedrock, it's built on sand. And what will happen is as the sand shifts, the house will tilt, and eventually the house will collapse because it was not built on a firm foundation. So people who work with nature have to see the world not as they want it to be, but as it is. However, people who work with people whose job it is to master man, they don't have to see the world as it is. They have to see what people want the world to be. You see the difference? If you are dealing with a forest fire that's coming your way, and you don't recognize all of the qualities that are going to affect that forest fire, where the forest is densest, when the last rain was, where there are streams and swamps, where the wind is blowing, how strong the wind is blowing, what kind of trees are dry or not, where people are, where roads are, where water mains are. If you don't take all those things into account, whatever strategy you have to evacuate people from the affected area and to organize fire suppression is going to fail. You've got to see the fire for what it is in the forest as it really is. But when dealing with people, this is tough. I want to believe, I've always wanted to believe, that given a choice between truth and falsehood, that almost every decent, sane human being will choose truth, even if it's more difficult. But in my 55 years or so, I have discovered that unfortunately, many people are very self-indulgent. And rather than recognize an unpleasant truth, rather than admit to something that they don't agree with as being true, they will engage in a form of self-deception or self-delusion, and they will violently react if you try to shake that. It's as if they're saying, no, I do not want the world to be like that. I do not want to live in a world where there are terrorists, where there are diseases, where there are wars, where we have enemies. I do not want to live in a world where there's poverty and want and cruelty. I do not want to live in a world where I have to watch myself. We may not want to live in that world, but that world exists. If we ignore it, we're playing the ostrich's game. An ostrich is the closest thing our world has to a dinosaur. They have this giant, muscular body, and a little tiny brain. Their head is about the size of my fist. A little beak on top that can snap your fingers clean off, razor sharp. That's why keep your fingers away from the cage is written on every ostrich and emu cage in every zoo in the world. They are a dinosaur. Massive amounts of muscle and instinct, little tiny brain for making judgments. And when an ostrich classically is faced with a threat, it goes, boom. It has just put its head in a hole. All of the sense organs of that ostrich are in the hole. It can't see any evil. It can't hear any evil. It can't speak any evil. What it can't see can't hurt it. Meanwhile, it's standing there with its posterior, waiting to be bitten. Human beings and our capacity for self-delusion is what politics is all about. Convincing people that they can have their cake and eat it too. Convincing people that the way they want the world to believe is relevant. And it's not just lies, and it's not just manipulation, and it's not just people being self-indulgent. Human beings are as much creatures of faith as we are of mind or body. That can be a religious faith, it can be a philosophical faith, but we really think that the things we believe in are important because they affect how we look at life. You can be a cheerful person, a confident person, a purposeful person, or you can be a bobo depressive. All based on how your faith is doing. Are you happy with the way your life is working? Are you confident that your life is being worthwhile in a way that it's being spent? Faith matters. So managing men isn't just a question of cynically manipulating their self-delusions. It's a question of appealing to their faith, of inspiring it, of maybe encouraging it to develop in a certain way that will be useful to them and to the people around them. And the real key is learning how to work, appeal to, and try to shape the faith of others without developing a contempt for them, without developing a sense of superiority and smugness, because no one is above this. We all delude ourselves. We all have faith, and those things that we have faith in tend to be the most important things in our lives. So mastering nature involves objective thought. Mastering men, including mastering our own selves, involves appreciating how much our wants affect our perceptions. We'll see how this affects politics in a moment.